It's a signal that you're looking for credit and a potential sign that you may be overextended or you may need that credit badly, and that makes it a possible risk for the bank. Hey everybody, welcome to the Abroaders Travel Podcast, your weekly meetup with thousands of entrepreneurs, hustlers, creators, nomads, ninjas, wanderers, and world changers, all seeking to build the skills and connections to live a life without borders. If you want to learn more about what we do or download our entire podcast archive, check out the website, abroaders.com. Happy Wednesday morning and welcome to another episode of the Abroaders Podcast. I'm Erik, checking in with you from Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, and today we are going to be getting back to basics and diving into all the information you need to get started earning points with credit card applications. We have talked about this a couple of times on previous shows, in particular episodes number 5 and 33, but AJ and I have learned a ton since then, and we wanted to put together a comprehensive resource that covers all the bases. So this is actually going to be part 1 of a 2-part series that's going to take you A to Z through all the things that you need to know to earn points with credit card signups. Today, I'm going to be walking you through a pre-application review process to determine if you're ready to make a round of applications right now. Then we're going to dive into how to select banks and cards based on your spending and your travel goals. Lastly, we're going to cover the 3 pieces of information you need to know to evaluate every single credit card sign-up bonus offer. In part 2 of the series next week, we're going to be transitioning from planning to execution, covering best practices for applying for cards, working your way through reconsideration, and how to document your progress to make sure that you're able to continue earning points from banks for the long term. This 2-part series should be especially helpful for those just starting out, but there's definitely going to be some advanced topics in both shows for those of you who have been with us for a while. So we are going to be covering some things like business card applications, even if you don't have a business, advanced techniques for reconsideration, hard and fast rules for avoiding automatic denials, or not getting a bonus because you failed to read the fine print. So even if you know your way around a little bit with this, I encourage you guys to stay with us. You can find show notes for today at abroaders.com/applications. Okay, so the first step to planning out a set of applications is to check your credit. And so you're going to want to do a pre-application review. We talked quite a bit in the past on the show about what the factors are that make up your credit score and how banks evaluate whether they want to give you a new credit card account. So today I want to focus on the couple of things that you can actually have an impact on right before you make this application. So the other factors that are included in your credit score, just to review, are like your history of on-time payments, the average account age, and the total age of your credit history. So how long you've had credit extended to you, either as loans or credit card accounts, things like that. And then the number of accounts you have and the type of accounts. So those are all things combined with any derogatory remarks, like any bankruptcies or bad stuff that's on your report. Those are the types of things that you really can't do anything about before making a set of applications. However, there are some factors that you have a bit more control over. The major one is your credit utilization. So that's how much of your credit you're actually using. And the banks are looking at this on both a individual account basis and across all of your accounts. So, for example, if you have one credit card and the limit is $10,000 and you're using $1,000, you spend up to $1,000 on your card, your utilization is 10%. So they look at that for each card and they look at it all across all of your cards. So if you've got 2 of those cards and each one has a $10,000 limit, then your total limit's $20,000, and that determines your total utilization. So if you're spending $1,000 on one and $1,000 on the next, your total use is $2,000 out of $20,000, still comes out to 10%. So the key takeaway here is that you want to make sure that all of those utilizations, both the overall and each card, is under 30%. 30% is a red flag. So this is what you can do. If you check your report, which I recommend creditkarma.com, it makes it really easy to see your utilization on all of your different accounts. It will tell you if you've got 30% or higher on any account. And what you need to do before you actually apply for these cards is you need to pay that down and wait for the bank to report it to the agency. That can definitely improve your chance of getting approved. The next thing that you want to check with your credit score before you make a round of applications is your inquiries. And again, creditkarma.com, the free website, is a great resource for this because it lists all the credit inquiries on your report. Now, one thing to keep in mind, there are 3 different credit reporting agencies, and banks tend to report inquiries to one of the 3. There are cases where banks report to all of them or pull your information from all of them. But in general, they're picking one, and it can be a little bit tricky to figure out which one they're going to select. And we can get into that a little bit later in the show to talk about, especially for situations where people have maybe a derogatory mark or a bankruptcy that's on one of their reports, but not on all of them. But the main guideline here with your inquiries is that every time the bank pulls your credit report, it's a signal that you're looking for credit and a potential sign that you may be overextended or you may need that credit badly, and that makes it a possible risk for the bank. So their formula is looking at how many times you're applying for cards and just trying to get a feel for, are you potentially just a responsible, normal customer, or are you suddenly applying for a ton of cards all the time and you might be really desperate and a high liability to default on your credit card loan. So here's what you want to take a look at with the inquiries. First of all, you want to check and see what banks you have inquiries listed for within the last 90 days. And the reason for that is that some banks have a hard rule where they will not approve a second application within somewhere between 60 and 90 days. So the line is there, and if you don't want to have to memorize what the rule is for each bank, the easy way to do it is just say 90 days, because after 90 days, pretty much any lender will give you a second chance with an application. So if you applied in November, you're going to be okay by the same date in February, regardless of which bank. In some cases, you could do it as early as January, but that's something you have to kind of look up and take a look at what each individual bank's rule is. Okay, so here's how it works with Credit Karma, just to sort of walk you through the interface. You're going to go to My Finances once you log in, and you can click on Full Credit Report. And that's where you're going to find all this information it should take just a couple of minutes to check if you've already got your Credit Karma account set up. In that full credit report, you can see an indicator if you have any accounts that are using over 30% of the credit limit. So there's kind of like a warning that's already preset, and it'll tell you which account that is. So I'm actually looking at mine now, and I've got one account that's quite a bit over that. So right now I've got one account that's using 60% of its credit limit. And so if I were going to make a round of applications soon, I would want to pay that card down quite a bit and try and get into the like 10 to 20 range and then make my application. And it's super easy to do, right? It's a situation where I've got a $5,500 limit and I'm currently using $3,312. So that's how much I've spent so far this month, and I just need to pay that down before I can take the next step. Okay, so the next thing you want to take a look at is your credit inquiries. And if you click here, still looking at the full credit report, you can see where it says the number of credit inquiries you have. And if you click that tab, it's going to list the inquiries and which bank they came from, or in some cases you'll have inquiries from other agencies as well. So for example, T-Mobile does a hard credit inquiry when they check for your cell phone service. So I have one of those from T-Mobile. And the information that's important here is that you've got the date of the inquiry and which lender. So what the creditor's name. So that could be Barclays, that could be Chase, that could be Citibank, American Express, etc. And so by having access to that information, you can see when the last time you applied for a credit card with each lender. And that's going to be important a little bit later on as we plan out this round of applications. Because like we said, you want to give yourself 90 days for each application. So if I last applied less than 90 days ago with Chase, I'm going to want to wait at least a little bit more time until it's been a full 90 days since my last inquiry with Chase, just to be safe. That concludes your due diligence that you need to do with respect to your credit health. Pay down that utilization and check your inquiries. Make sure you don't have any banks that are off limits, or if there are banks that you need to wait, just make a note of that so you don't pick any cards from those lenders. The next thing you want to do, and this is definitely the more fun part, is to think about your travel goals. So where do you want to travel, and where are you going to be leaving from is pretty important. So, assuming you're starting in the U.S., you just want to think about regionally, what part of the world you want to travel. Are you looking at traveling to Asia, South America, Europe? just make a list of a few destinations, or maybe you're really flexible, and that's great. So if you're open-ended, that it's even less important. But it is also important to think about when you want to travel. So are you looking to do this next month, in 3 months, in 6 months? No immediate plans, but maybe you want to start building that points portfolio, which, by the way, is a really good idea. It's awful because what happens is a lot of people come to us and say, like, I've got a trip coming up in 2 months. Can you help me do this with points? And most of the time the answer is no. Not always, but a lot of times it's just not possible to do it in a sustainable, responsible way and get those points within a couple of months. The exception being people that are spending a ton of money on credit cards. Sometimes they can pull it off because they're able to spend more and reach those bonuses quickly. But you want to give yourself some lead time. And the last thing to think about with respect to your travel is, are you looking for an open-ended trip? So some people, if you're in a position where you don't have a specific time that you're going to have to come back, then you want to be looking for programs that you can do a one-way and leave that open-ended. Gives you a ton more flexibility. And so from a planning perspective, there's a big difference between knowing that you want to take a round-trip vacation to the Caribbean for 2 weeks when you've got some time off and you want to get out of the cold weather. That's totally different than knowing that you want to leave for Brazil sometime after Christmas and you don't know when you're coming back. So those are some things you want to note down about your travel plans. Lastly, and this is really important, you want to document your monthly spending. So what I mean by this is you want to write down the number of dollars that you can spend in 90 days. That's kind of your benchmark time frame. That's what most of the credit card bonus offers are requiring. They give you 90 days. There are definitely some exceptions. Some of them are 120 days. Some of them are even 6 months or 180 days. But the easiest thing to do is just think about your monthly spending. So let's say that's $1,000. That means your 90-day number is going to be $3,000. And one other caveat here is that not everything counts as spending. There's some expense that you're going to have in your day-to-day life that shouldn't be included here. So like stuff that you tend to pay cash for, small expenses. I use credit cards for as much as I can, but there's certain places that won't take a credit card or, offer that stupid minimum where they're saying you got to spend $10 at the convenience store to be able to use a card. So keep in mind those restrictions. And even more importantly, one of the big restrictions tends to be rent or possibly your mortgage. Most situations, you're not going to be able to pay rent with a credit card. Or if you can, it's going to be expensive. They're going to charge you a fee on top of that. We can come back to later on whether it makes sense to pay that fee, but at the very minimum, when you're looking at what is your spending over the next 90 days, you should figure out whether it's possible to include your rent in that. So your spending should be anything that you can put on a credit card. So the next thing that you should consider is whether you want to include business cards in your round of applications. And this does become a little bit more of an advanced topic. So I want to just go over a couple of basic principles here. The first one is that you do not need to actually own a business to get a business credit card. And from a bank's perspective and just generally an accounting perspective, it makes a ton of sense to have the ability to open up a business card even if you're just starting a business or even if you just have an idea. Because if you want to open up a lemonade stand, it can be really helpful to buy all the materials for your lemonade stand on your business credit card and keep that separate from your personal accounting so that you're able to more easily track, whether you're making money, whether you're making a profit, whether your, expenses are getting out of hand. So there's lots of scenarios where people want to keep all those expenses separate. So that's sort of the framework and the reason that banks allow you to apply for business cards, even if you don't have a corporation or an LLC or anything. And so the way that this actually works from a technical side is that instead of a business name, you're going to just use your name, your legal name. And instead of the business EIN number, which is your tax identification number for a business, it's the employer identification number. Instead of that, you're going to just use your social security number. And this is perfectly above board. So you're just going to answer all the questions on the application. And it's pretty likely that if you do apply as a sole proprietor, or in other words, using your social security number as the business tax ID, they're going to initially deny your application and you're going to have to call the bank to sort of talk over your business. And often they'll ask you some questions. I encourage you guys to be 100% honest with the answers there. And the bottom line here is that the bank is truly evaluating your personal creditworthiness. So unless you have like a multi-million dollar in revenue kind of company, they're not looking at a business credit report. They're counting on your personal credit as their sort of collateral against any charges you make on their card, even though it's a business card. So in other words, they're holding you personally responsible, and your personal credit score should be enough to get you opened for a business account. So should you bother with this? There are a lot of scenarios where a business card can be a huge asset. One of them is that if you're trying to apply for a couple of cards from Chase, remember we talked about that. You only get one card every 90 days from each lender. But business cards are an exception. It's a totally different category. So in other words, with Chase or Citi or Amex, you can apply for a business card and a personal card on the same day. So it does open up your options. That being said, if you're a beginner at this, that probably means you don't have a bunch of reward cards. And so that also means that you're eligible for all the offers. For me, it's a little bit trickier because I've got a ton of cards. And so I've got to keep track of which ones I've already earned the bonus and whether I'm eligible to get the bonus again. If you're just starting out, it can be easier to just say, forget the business cards for now and get your first churn rolling with just a couple of personal cards where you know you're going to be able to meet the minimum spend. Okay, so now it's time to talk about the ins and outs of actually planning this credit card churn. And there's 3 key factors that you need to know about every single credit card offer. The first one is, how much is this going to cost you? And the answer to that question is generally the card's annual fee minus any statement credits. So sometimes they'll give you an example like this. The card has an annual fee of $95, but you also get, on top of the miles, you're also going to get a $100 statement credit. So that wipes out the annual fee. The other thing that can affect the cost of a credit card offer is most of the time, the annual fee is waived for the first year. So they may say the annual fee is $95, but it's waived for your first 12 statement cycles or your first 12 months. And those tend to be really good deals. And I would advise not to worry too much about the annual fee if it's waived for the first year. Definitely keep track, put it on your calendar or set some other sort of reminder so that you know when that annual fee is coming up, and pay attention to your statements. And at the end of the year, you can make a decision whether you want to cancel the card or keep it open. So don't worry about the waived annual fees when you're planning your application, but do worry about the ones that aren't waived. So for example, the US Airways MasterCard right now, which is one of the examples that I have in the show notes as a potential credit card churn. This is a card that you get your bonus on the first purchase, which is great because there's no spending requirement, but you do have to pay that $89 fee. So you want to factor that cost in. The second factor that you need to think about with every credit card sign-up offer is, how much do I need to spend? And so the answer to that question is, most banks are requiring you to put a certain amount of transaction value on the card before they're going to give you the bonus. So an example of that's going to be like $3,000 in 90 days is a really typical one. Sometimes they're 1,000, sometimes they're 2,000 in 90 days, sometimes they're as much as 5,000 or 10,000. So it's really important to keep that number in mind. And that's why earlier in the process, we wrote down the amount of money that you're spending, excluding things like rent and utilities and car payments, anything you can't use a credit card. So that's why we got that number, because now we're looking at what it's actually going to require you to spend to earn the miles. One huge beginner's mistake is to bite off more than you can chew and end up getting more cards with more spend requirement than you can safely make. And so then you risk either not getting the miles because you didn't spend enough money, or even worse, spending too much money and not being able to pay off the bill and getting those huge interest rates. So be really careful with that. You want to be conservative. And the third component of all credit card offers that you want to take a look at is how many miles you're going to get. Obviously, that's the big bonus that you're willing to incur this cost and willing to, go through the process of hitting the minimum spend, is to earn that sign-up bonus. So obviously, you want to try and maximize the number of bonus points. Okay, so I'm going to jump into a couple of sample churns, a couple of sets of applications, just to kind of give you an idea of how to work through the framework that we just went through. But before I do, one other thing that I forgot to mention is we talked about when you want to travel when we were talking about those travel goals. And so one thing you want to keep in mind also is when you can expect to actually get the miles. And this is a really common mistake, people not leaving themselves enough time. So we just talked about this, you may have a spending requirement that's $3,000 in 90 days. you're not going to actually get those miles for quite a bit longer than that 90 days unless you can expedite by hitting your spending requirement faster. So in other words, if you know that you can spend all of the spending requirement in 1 month, in 30 days, and pay it off, that's when they actually send the miles. So the date that you're going to receive those miles and be able to use them for travel is usually somewhere between 4 and 8 weeks after you pay off the statement of your credit card that you hit the requirement. So if I hit the requirement in my second statement, it's my first month I don't make it, second month I do make it, it's not even that date that I make the spend, it's the date that I pay the bank. So I pay off my balance in full, and then they register that, and then there's that process where that's where the 4 to 8 weeks comes in, where they're sending those miles to the banks. If you have specific questions and you are looking at a trip coming up soon, you should definitely get in touch with us. Shoot us an email to support@abroaders.com, because we've got some of that mapped out pretty well, where we can tell you how long it takes Citibank to post miles to American Airlines, or how long it takes Chase to post miles to United. So those are some things to keep in mind. But in general, you're going to see your miles after you pay the bill on the statement that you hit the minimum spending requirement. All right, hopefully that makes sense. Let's go through this with a couple of examples. So starting with that minimum spend, regular spending number, let's say that you spend $1,500 a month on your personal expenses. That's just what your normal bills come out. It's not going to stress you out to put that much spend on a credit card. So that means in 3 months, you can spend $4,500, which means you could do a card with a $1,000 minimum spend and a card with a $3,000 minimum spend. That's only going to add up to $4,000. So you're staying under your minimum spending threshold. And what you want to do now is just take those two kind of limits and know that you've got $4,500 to work with, and try and get the maximum number of points that you can. So let's do an example here. I'm going to do an example for a little bit more spend. So let's say, because basically if you're in that 3,000 or 4,000, you're probably just going to do one card at a time. And that's perfectly fine, right? So you should just apply, if your spending is like $1,000 a month or less, you don't want to bite off more than you can chew. You should just apply for one card, get the points, and then do it again. But let's talk about combos, because this is important if you do spend a little bit more money, or as we said before, if you're bringing your business spending into this, it's possible to obviously generate a lot more spend if you're using a business credit card and a personal card. So let's say that you're in the $5,000 range of spending limit. So in this case, you might choose the Citibank Platinum Select card, which offers 50,000 points after 3,000 spend in 90 days, and the annual fee is waived there. And the Chase British Airways card, which offers 50,000 points after $2,000 spend in 90 days. Also for a limited time with the annual fee waived. So that's a combo where your total spend is going to be $5,000 in 90 days. That's perfect because that's what you're able to spend. And your total take of points is going to be 50,000 plus another 50,000. So you got 100,000 points in one round of applications. Should take you about 20 minutes to get done. And that's enough for a lot of free travel. Let's take a look at another option here. Let's say you were spending a little bit more money. Another combination you might consider would be the Chase Sapphire Preferred card, which offers 40,000 points after 4,000 spend in 90 days, and the Citi Business Advantage card. So this is a business card from Citi. This one offers 50,000 points after 3,000 spend in 90 days. So the key here, this time you're signing up for $7,000 in spend in 90 days, and you're actually getting fewer points than the first example. So this one is 90,000 points total, 40 and 50. Now, it is totally possible that the Chase Sapphire points are going to be worth more to you. So there are situations where this makes sense. And this is where it actually comes down to, it gets a little more complicated because it comes down to where you're planning to travel. So I would say if you're just starting out, that first set of the Citi Platinum Select and the Chase British Airways, that's a great combo. There's less spend requirement and you're getting 100,000 points that are going to be super useful. One last thing to say with these example credit card requirements is that there are some scenarios where you can actually add on another card without increasing your minimum spend. So I talked a little bit earlier in the show about the Barclays US Airways MasterCard. And that card gives you 40,000 points after the first purchase. So You could combine that with either of the two offers above and not change the spending requirement. The only change would be your total cost, because the annual fee of $89 is not waived for that card. So in other words, you're basically buying 40,000 miles for $89, which by the way is an awesome deal, because US Airways can take you from the US to the Caribbean, to Mexico, to Hawaii, and almost to South America. Actually, yes, to South America if you do it at the right time of year. Round trip to all those destinations for less than 40,000. So you're like literally buying an $89 round trip plus the taxes you're going to pay when you actually book the ticket. So that can be a good deal, and don't forget to take a look at that as well. If there's cards that have earning after the first purchase, it may be worth tossing those onto the group of applications and not impacting your minimum spending requirement. One last note about doing this in a combination format where you've got a personal and a business card. As I said before, it does enable you to apply for two different cards from the same bank. So instead of having to do a Chase and a Citi card, you can do two Citi cards, one that's business and one that's personal. So that's an advantage there. But if you are going to manage this, one thing to think about when you're considering how that spend is going to play out is that it's pretty easy in some people's situation to put business expenses on a personal card and then reimburse yourself from the business. So this is something AJ and I do all the time with Broaders, is if we're working on a minimum spend for one of our personal cards, we'll just use that card to make a purchase. So either buy software or pay one of our contractors. And then there's a great tool called Expensify that lets you basically just scan a copy of the receipt. You take a picture of it with your iPhone and create a report, and then you can actually reimburse directly via direct deposit. So with a few clicks from anywhere in the world, I can actually take a purchase that I made on my personal credit card, and I can initiate a reimbursement from our business checking account to my personal checking account to pay me back for that purchase. So if you are in a situation where you're mixing business and personal, you don't necessarily have to really split out the business and personal expenses and line them up and match them up to a card. You can kind of add them together in some cases and then just use the card that you need to use for the purchases and then move the money around afterwards. Now, obviously, this is not the case for everybody. If you're able to get a business card for a business that's not 100% yours or has other people that make financial decisions, it may be more complicated. So you want to look into that before you get into this round of applications. The other side of the coin here is being able to put personal expenses on a business card and then pay back the business. Again, especially if you're with somebody else's business, it could be a little bit tricky. But if you own your own company, it's pretty easy to do the math and just move the money around. So that's another option that you should consider. The last thing I want to talk with you guys about is the possibility of getting more aggressive. So if you've got a trip coming up and you really, really want to use miles to get there, it is possible to do some manufactured spending and get more spend and ultimately earn more points from your application signups than you would just through your regular day-to-day spending. I don't advise this as something that beginners should take on as a strategy because there's just too many things that can go wrong. It's too easy to either miss your bonus requirement and not get any points at all, or overspend and get in over your head and end up paying interest. So you need to have a really firm financial grip on what's going on and be really careful. But that being said, there are great ways to manufacture spend, and especially if you have cash on hand. So if you're not just living month to month and you have $5,000 or $10,000 in a savings account, that makes this a ton easier because what you can do is just buy gift cards to get that minimum spend. So what you do is you take your new credit card, let's say you've got a $3,000 minimum spend. I go out to Walmart and I buy 6 $500 gift cards that are Visa gift cards. So I just go up to one of those little kiosks that are like usually by the register and I grab 6 $500 gift cards. I use my credit card to buy all 6 of them and load them up and the cashier activates them. And now I've got $3,000 on gift cards. Now the good news is I just hit my minimum spend on my credit card. The bad news is that I have to actually spend that money off of the gift card. So I got to use these 6 gift cards. It's a little bit harder to extract that money. So the key thing is I'm going to have to pay that $3,000 credit card bill next month. And so if you don't have cash in the bank, that can be a place you can get into trouble. If you do, it's a great way to shift future spending to the present. If you don't have any cash on hand, there you really need to be asking yourself how much extra effort you're willing to put in, because this is where hustle meets travel hacking, right? So the example I just gave with the gift cards, that's still possible if you don't have cash. It's just a little riskier. So maybe you buy those 6 gift cards, those Visa gift cards, and then you sell them online, right? You could sell them for $480 instead of $500, or whatever, or give them to family and have them reimburse you. That's actually a really good way. A lot of times it's possible, if you've got family or friends that aren't into the travel hacking thing and spend a decent amount of money, you can ask them if they'd be willing to let you put big purchases on a card and they could pay you back in cash. That works for a lot of people. It's something I did early on when I was doing this as well. Last thing I want to warn you guys about, and I think we've already talked about this a little bit, but it is absolutely critical that you pay your bill in full every month. And the reason for this is that the interest that you're going to pay on a credit card when you're paying off just the minimum balance is going to eat away. It is going to destroy all the value that you're getting from doing this credit card sign up and getting those miles. So your 50,000 miles, your points, you can forget about them if you're paying interest on the credit card to get those points. It's not worth it. The math doesn't work out. You can trust that American Express and Citi and Chase ran the numbers with some really smart MIT mathematicians, and they know that they're taking a certain percentage of people to the cleaners. So if you're impulsive, if you've had financial issues in the past, or if you're still in credit card debt, be really, really careful with this, guys. It's not worth it. Wait until you get your financial situation under control, then start using credit cards to earn points. Thank you guys so much for being with us. This was the 49th episode of the Abroaders podcast. We are super excited to get back with you guys next week for the half-century mark. Episode 50, we will be continuing this conversation and talking about how to execute that churn that we worked on planning out today. This week's international jam comes thanks to our buddy Idausa Ness at mimicmethod.com. He is the dude to teach you a foreign language, so if you're looking at that, definitely check him out. He's also always putting me on to really interesting new music and knows a lot of international jams. This artist is called A Tribe Called Red. They are from Canada. They've got some Native American roots and some pretty interesting sound. There's a lot of sampling going on with drums and kind of some crazy shit. So I hope you guys enjoy. This one is called Burn Your Village to the Ground, and it's a free download on SoundCloud, so you can get this baby right into your music rotation. As always, thanks for joining us. I wish you pleasant, comfortable, and cheap travels. Cheers from Ho Chi Minh City. I will see you next week, 8 a.m. Eastern Standard. Hey, Brothers, don't be shy. Hop over to the website and join our email list for exclusive travel hacking content. If you like what we're up to, the best way you can support the show is by leaving us a 5-star review on iTunes. Lastly, we would love to hear from you, so send your show feedback to Erik or AJ at abroaders.com. We will see you next week.